So soon the hour of fate comes around. The ever-chosen stirs from his dark throne and prepares the blow that shall split the world asunder. Realms of old are fallen, lost beneath the fury of the Northlands, or smothered by the vermin from below. Some heroes battle on, too stubborn to recognize that all hope is lost. Their time is past. A new age of chaos and dismay beckons. Perhaps I am foolish also, for I fight with no hope of victory. I seek only to weaken the dark gods, to shake their hold upon the future. No other course remains, not to mortals, nor to the divine. These are the end times. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Philosopher's Den. Here we are as the YouTube Philosophers, kicking off the last and final tome of the end times. It is time for Archaon. Excited about this, guys?
Absolutely.
Oh,
Yeah, it's been a lot of build-up for this. So we have seen Nagash arise. We have seen Nurgle crush the Empire underfoot. We have many heroes dying along the way. We have seen elves murder each other until they could do no more but squirrel away to Athaloran after they sunk Ulthuan. And then we've seen the Skaven rise to power in surging forward on the world and even bringing down all of Lustria with their bombing with the moon. So a lot of momentous events here, and just at the tail end of Thankful, of course, is finally the long build-up of the arrival of Archaon. So he has now made his presence felt and stomped all over Middenheim and set up his first bastion right there. So maybe we'll pass it to Keith and he'll tell us what's the state of the nations after Middenheim went down.
Certainly. So the Skaven have, of course, risen and they've taken over Stalia, Itilia. We know all about that. The Empire is in quite a state of disarray. Everything is compacted and concentrated around Averheim, which is where the opening chapter of Archaon is going to be set and what we're going to be talking about. Funnily enough, we haven't heard anything about the Moot, and I think we were talking last week with Vince, and he kind of said that the Moot is one of the places that doesn't really get mentioned, so it doesn't get touched at all, which is unfortunate.
We'll come back to that.
We'll come back to that, all right. Of course, we got the Lustria and the Southlands are completely destroyed by like continent-sized meteors. Going back to the elves, just to remind everyone, Nagaroth was completely overrun by Valkia and her horde of corn-worshipping warriors. And, of course, Ulthuan has sunk. As we came into the end of Thankful, all of the dwarf holds are either destroyed or they're dug in so deep that they're basically never going to be heard of again. There is a contingent of dwarves from Zufbar and Karaz Kadrin, the Slayer Hold, led by Ungrim and Iron Fist, who is the incarnate of fire. And they have basically decided to honor the old oath that they made with the Empire, and they're all holed up in Averheim with the Emperor. If we cut over to Slovenia, that is just completely under the sway of Nagash and all his nasty death magic. So his Black Pyramid is centered right in the middle of Slovenia, surrounded by a mold of kind of swirling purple death energy, and nothing is going on there. And Nagash has kind of just retreated there to kind of convalesce for the upcoming battle with the Chaos Gods. Of course, all of the elves are hanging out in Athaloran. And it also makes a brief mention on one specific guy, Teclis, and that he's not really abandoned hope. And what his kind of idea is that he wants to, unravel that vortex, and he captured a couple of the winds of magic, but a few of them flew free, but a few of them he was able to take and bind. So he was able to bind Shadow into Malekith, Light into Alariel, he was able to bind Light into his staff. Of course, Karl was the incarnate of Heaven. We saw that the Wind of Fire lodged itself in one of the Ancestor runes and then became enlarged into Ungrim Iron Fist. And at one point, the Wind of Metal was in Thorgrim Grudgebearer's Rune of Eternity, but he was unable to embrace the changing nature of the wind of metal. So that's out flying into the world somewhere, and then of course the wind of east is also flying around. So we need to figure out what happens to them. One of the things I really liked about the opening part of this chapter is there's just a little bit where it definitely seems like it's an entry from Lilia, who we haven't really heard from since Cain. So it's really kind of summing up how the realms have fallen, some heroes battle on, not realizing that hope is lost, and a new age of chaos is upon us. And that it says that she fights with no hope for victory, but only seeks to weaken the power of the dark gods in the coming future, and no other course remains. Which I thought was kind of interesting because her protege or her the mortal that she works through is Teclis, who's actively fighting and still thinks that they can win, which I thought was quite an interesting kind of paradox between those two. What did you think, Vince?
Yeah, two things about what you said. One, I love that we actually got the reveal that what was going on with Thorgrim's Eternity Rune was that the Wind of Metal was hanging out, and that's why he was like a superhero in that final battle where he just felt empowered and could grab Queek by the neck and just snap him like a twig and all this stuff. But it left him because he just couldn't accept it. I thought that was interesting. And then I think that's interesting that you pegged that as Lilith. In reading that, I've looked at that because it doesn't directly attribute her, at least as far as I remember. But as soon as you said it, I kind of, as I was sitting here, reread the text real quick, and I was like, yeah, it's totally in her voice. So I think you absolutely nailed that. I hadn't even thought about who it really was, whether it was just a hero or what. But no, it is absolutely her. You're right.
Yeah, the thing that tipped it off for me, I think, was it didn't say there is no hope for victory. It says I fight for no hope for victory. So I really got that kind of, it's the first person from Lilia type view.
Yeah, and she also says not for the god, not for mortals or for the divine. And the mortals of the world don't tend to talk about the business of the gods. Like, well, there's no hope for our gods; they're all dead. That would be really weird for a mortal being to say, right?
Yeah, that's right.
But it would make perfect sense for a divine being to say. So yeah, that's great insight right there.
So what does the Warhammer Nations look like right now? Like really, what's left that's not destroyed, crushed, or under the sway of chaos and/or the Skaven at this point? I mean, we got Bretonnia, done a long time ago. As you say, all the Border Princes, Estalia, all those other realms. And Empire obviously is just continuing to shrink and shrink and shrink. And there's hardly anything left beyond Averheim and Sylvania, as you mentioned, which is technically part of the Empire. That's Vlad's new Elector Counthood.
And the Moot.
And the Moot, yeah.
Unsullied.
Athalorn.
Yeah, Athalorn.
Because all the dwarf realms are crushed now too, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Even Zufbar, the last one standing where Thorgrim was, all done.
And assumingly over in the east, at this point in the story, we know, or at least we think, that the eastern nations are still standing. So like Nippon and Cathay are probably still around at this point. Although, I believe we come to them later.
And Greenskin Nation hasn't had a big part to play yet. So I guess we haven't been told that they're wiped out. I mean, Skarsnik had a part to play in the Thankwall book, and he had a presence there, but we haven't heard anything from ogres or from orcs for ages and ages. So I guess it leaves us with only small little pockets over here as we resume it. Okay. Well then, I guess we got a big moment here of Archaon. So maybe it's worth mentioning where we left Archaon first of all, Vince, and then take us into what he's plotting right now.
Yeah, so this is one of my favorite scenes in the whole series. So Archaon is sitting upon sort of a hastily made throne of skulls in the chamber of Ulrich, the upper chamber, the one that had sort of the false flame in it, right? And and who comes to visit him but old Kairos Fateweaver, old Mr. Two-Headed Bird, and the most favored of the Changer of Ways of Tzeentch, as it were. And he comes in, and Archaon sort of deep in thought, thinking about the nature of this false flame, that it held, to his eyes, it held no real power. he's pretty much unaware of what Teclis did, so he has no idea that the flame was taken. He just saw it as like it had no real power to oppose him. And he thinks that when he crushes the rest of Empire, he'll prove Sigmar just as false as Ulrich. And so old Fate Weaver comes in and starts playing Zinchi games, and says, hey, you just conquered this city. You're on the march. What's with the sitting around, bud? Kind of gives him the old chop chop. Chaos Gods want some action. We didn't empower you and choose you to sit around. You're not the Lord of Couch Potatoes. And basically, Archaon says, look, I'm gonna get this done. It's fine. But I have my own reasons and I have my own time. I keep my own counsel. Archaon really doesn't see himself as a puppet. I think that comes across here, right? He is very much like focus. He believes himself his own man, despite the fact that he knows he's empowered by the four gods of chaos. And basically, Fate Weaver starts pulling some stuff and says, well, my master's content for now, but I don't know about the other chaos gods. They need entertainment from you mortals, so you might want to think about that. And that's when Archaon rips out the sword and is like, chops his heads off and gives the old gladiator, are you not entertained? And kills Fate Weaver very quickly with the old his sword there. I don't remember, what is the name of his sword? Slayer of Kings, right? That's the name. Kingslayer, Slayer of Kings. Yeah,
that's right.
It's got the demon bound in it, and he boom boom chops off Fate Weaver's heads. I mean, in the end, Fate Weaver's not a physical combatant. Archaon is, and he happens to be standing right next to one of the most brutal warriors in the world. Not the best choice there for old Fate Weaver. He didn't see that one coming. Apparently, he didn't weave the fate strong enough, and Archaon kicks his body, boom, down into a big pool of blood. There's just this pool of blood that's kind of burbling and guggling from all the dead people. And then he sort of incants and finishes this kind of ritual. And out from the pool, his offering of the greatest sort of, chosen of Tzeentch or whatever, made to Khorne, outsteps Kabanda, Kabanda, I guess is how you would say that. Kabanda, I don't know. Which is a big giant bloodthirster, one of the new sort of bloodthirsters that gets introduced within this book. And he comes out and he's like, "What are your orders, my master? Let's go to work." And he has and then my most favorite little end here. He pulls the Leon from The Professional when the bloodthirster says, "Whom do we slay?" And Archaon turns to him, and I won't actually yell it, but I'm sure you can search for this on YouTube, and just says, "Everyone." Just like, which I love. That's exactly the right line out of this guy.
I have a feeling that Kabanda was, or if it's not exactly the same name, it sounds very much like a name from some WWF wrestler of the early 90s.
He was probably part of a team.
Yeah, so now he's forming the tag team with Archaon, and they're going to go kill them all.
Yes, and he has a very nice little thing where he says Kabanda of the third host. And so they kind of imply there's some other hosts out there too, probably with more like him. So we get kind of a little hint of that. Well, and then we're obviously the target, or these two guys, is to finish off the Empire. He knows that Karl Franz has scurried off south, and it's really his goal is in order to crush the Empire, he's got to crush Karl Franz himself. So how about it, Keith? We'll turn it back to you. Tell us what the state of Mr. KFC is in Averheim.
Well, kind of in concert with the whole Skaven uprising and taking on the Empire, where they kind of laid siege to Altdorf and Marienburg and all over the place, inevitably there's Skaven all over Averheim as well. And so when Village got there, he kind of co-opted them into his army, and Village was pretty content just setting them at the walls as cannon fodder and, taking the severe losses. And the Averheimers are doing, not bad. They've got Averheim is an incredibly modern city. All the walls are of the most modern design, so they're well equipped to withstand a siege. The electric cannon of Averheim was mad for anything black powder, so cannons, rocket batteries, what's the other called? Hellstorm. What's the big shooty thing it's called? I forget. Anyway,
Hell blasters.
Hell blasters. Thank you. Are totally well stocked, so they're actually not holding out too badly. To give you an idea of the kind of the characters from the Empire that are hanging around, you've got the Karl Franz Ascended on Deathclaw, so the Emperor. We have Ungrim Ironfist and his cadre of Slayer Dwarves and the Dwarves from Zufbar. We have Duke Jerrod and some of the last remaining Bretonnian Knights. Must be some of the last remaining Bretonnians left in the world at this point. And of course, you've got Ludwig Schwarzhelm, who's the Emperor's champion and his official standard bearer. And they're going to come up a bunch of times in this chapter.
I want to interject for a second here, because we could probably spell out how this all came to pass, right? So let's remind folks that when Valten went to Middenheim, the ploy was that they were all going to go south and they were going to meet up south. And he created the diversion that allowed Karl Franz and the citizenry, the plain old plebe citizens of Altdorf, to escape. So that's how they got to Averheim. The other guy you mentioned here is Village, and in the closing passages of Thankwall, Village was told to be the vanguard, go and trap them in Averheim and keep them there until I come and I'm going to kill the boss. So that's why he's there. What I missed somewhere along the way, maybe one of you guys caught this, is we haven't seen anything out of Schwarzhelm, I think, since the Battle of Heffingen back in Nagash. Right?
I think when Nagash went, or when Karl Franz went missing is the last time we saw him, kind of, right?
Yeah. So, is there any trace of? Do you guys recall of how he ended up here?
No.
All right, so we'll just accept it. There he is.
Yeah, I guess he just ended up here because I do not remember reading him about him doing anything, and I guess maybe he was around a little in Glocken, right? Like, don't they make mention of him a little in Glocken?
Well, no, Hellborg's all over the place.
Oh yeah, you're right.
Hellborg doing everything in Glocken.
Yep.
Yeah, but not Schwarzhelm.
You're right.
I think the only mention they had of him in Glocken is that Hellborg left him behind to guard with the muster of the Northern Marches. That's all I think I can recall.
Yeah.
Anyway, so if that's it, and let's not dwell on it too much. I just wondered if I had missed something horribly.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't think so.
Sorry, Keith, I'll let you jump in and carry on there.
Oh, sure. So Village and Archaon have a very contentious relationship. They definitely don't like each other. Village is as schemy as any kind of niche character that you can imagine. And in the closing of Thankful, when we saw that little back and forth between the two, Archaon made it pretty clear that he doesn't trust Village. All he wants him to do is conquer Averheim, but specifically, don't kill Karl Franz. That's all about Archaon. That's what he wants. But as I said, the men of the Empire, they're holding up pretty well, except that they're being constantly bombarded by hell cannons. And this is what's really going to break their siege. And at a couple points, several sections of the wall goes down, and one particularly bad point, there's quite a large breach. And it's this point where Village and his warriors take the field rather than just the Skaven chaff. And they are overcoming the defenders quite quickly, but of course Karl Franz comes down on Deathclaw, and Deathclaw just punches through people, and Karl's shaking his hammer at them, and basically sends the warriors scurrying. But, he's just one guy, and he starts getting a little bit overwhelmed. And then, of course, Ungrim and his dwarves turn up, because they're not one to miss out on a fight. And they start hacking and slashing left and right, and Village, fears for his safety. He's kind of a crazy kind of guy, so he knows when to just turn tail and run. And so he does. And then at this point, the Skaven kind of rear their furry heads again and say, "Oh well, we'll show the warriors how it's done." And under the direction of a Vermin Lord, they start assaulting the breach. But of course, the dwarves are no no strangers to killing Skaven, and Ungrim just splits that Vermin Lord's spine right in two. But of course, everyone's got a Vermin Lord. They're everywhere, so it's not really that big of a deal.
They're basically like subways. They're just opening up franchises everywhere.
Yeah, pretty much. Everyone gets a Vermin Lord.
And I thought of them as like a prize in the Happy Meal, right? So every kid gets one if you buy the Happy Meal.
Exactly. Yeah. So the dwarves and some of the light wizards are able to patch up the breach, but the bombardments continue. And then there's kind of like rumors floating around Averheim that Gregor Martak and Valten are still alive, and they're going to bring relief and they're going to bring help. But of course, Karl Franz has the advantage of a griffin. So he's able to fly up out of Averheim every morning and take a look around. And there's a bunch of like Chaos Furies floating around the top of Averheim, so they can't have a massive breakout. But he's able to scout around, and of course he sees this massive horde of warriors coming down from the north. And it's not Valten and Martak, it's Archaon. And it just goes on for miles and miles and miles. But very importantly, he notices that Archaon's not brought any more hell cannons with him. He's got no siege equipment that Karl Franz can identify, so Franz kind of hatches this plan that if we can make a sortie into the siege camp and destroy or let loose the hell cannons, well then we've got a pretty good chance of withstanding Archaon, because their walls are pretty big, we got lots of cannons, lots of black powder. So they hatch a plan to sally forth into a little town called Balgan, which used to be a little Averheim town, but now it's kind of the seat of Village's siege camp. One of you guys want to tell us what happens there? Kieran?
Yeah, I'll absolutely take it if that's all right with you there, Kieran.
Yeah, go man. Tell us the stories.
Absolutely. So Bolgan is basically the tightest cluster of these hell cannons, and like to put this in perspective, there's a huge number of these things. I don't remember if they ever give the exact total number, but it says 12 batteries of hell cannons. That seems like a lot, right? Anytime you start dealing in batteries. So they're all, it's kind of middle of the night, and the Chaos Dogs, there's always dogs around Chaos armies, Chaos Hounds, and they sort of start barking because dogs are psychic, as we all know, and the Northmen get up, peer out into the darkness, everything looks normal, they kind of kick their dogs because they're evil, and then they try to go back to sleep, and the dogs get their hackles up even more and start barking and barking and barking and barking and barking, and it's driving Village insane, because he is trying to perform this big ritual to summon a mighty host of demons, because in his mind, he needs to bring this place down. He heard about old Archaon coming down the road as well about a week from now, and he wants to get this place in the bag before Archaon shows up. In fact, his real hope is that he can summon the greatest host of demons that the mortal world has yet seen, and basically, if Averheim's conquered, he can turn and actually defeat Archaon. That's sort of in the back of his mind, is that he'll be able to somehow actually overwhelm Archaon himself. And that's when we get the introduction of well, I will flash forward to reveal a little piece of Balderdash from my perspective to this little moment. We get the Emperor Karl Franz Lightning Bridge teleportation. That is a neat ability that I didn't realize he had previously. That was nice.
Isn't he cool?
Yeah, that's a good story. That's a good plot ability. So yes, he rips a lightning portal open. I think he calls it a storm bridge. That basically starts inside Averheim and ends in Bolgan. And he rips open this big storm bridge, lightning portal, and he charges out and just starts ripping dudes up, just killing marauders and chaos warriors and knights. And he and Deathclaw are just going crazy. He's lightning bolting people and doing what he should do. And the whole point is he's sort of like the distraction, right? He kind of charges out, starts killing a bunch of people. It's the middle of the night. They're not ready to fight. Chaos people start trying to get their gear ready and go fight him, and they start reacting. And they all turn to him and basically ignore the giant lightning portal. And out of that, then that clears the space for the rest of his troops to show up. He brings with him like only the elite of the elite. So this is like his personal guard, the great swords and demigryphs and stuff like that, right? No, this isn't like he's not wheeling artillery through. This is all just like the most elite men with the sturdiest spines who are willing to face death without sort of any fear. Because that is what they're going to be doing here. And the whole point of their mission is to come out and sack the Hell Cannons. My favorite little group that's riding around here is he brings out some Pistoliers, who and I don't remember the name of the leader of the Pistoliers, but
he is Captain Corber and his Outriders.
There you go, yeah. So those dudes, the Outriders and the Pistoliers, they come charging in. They just start gunning down Hell Cannons. That's great. You gotta love those guys going to work, and so it's effectively the middle of the night, and effectively it's actually quite successful. I mean, really, the early part of this fight does very much go the Empire's way. They have losses. They have a couple tough moments, like there's the big slaughter brute that it takes the Emperor to come over and kill this thing, stuff like that. But really, like, the majority of the fight goes pretty good for the Hell Cannons, or sorry, for the Empire, as they destroy a lot of the Hell Cannons. I don't remember how many exactly it says they bring them down, but it was a lot. Something like 17 or 20 of them got destroyed there. So, I mean, that's, pretty good. They even have a nice little funny scene where they managed to basically, like, I think it was the Outriders, like, rode between two of them and killed the handlers, and then the Hell Cannons went mad and attacked each other and had a nice little, like, scrum as the Outriders and Pistoliers, like, rode around them. I can just picture them going, like, yeah, I got money on number 2. And, just like, and they have a fight, and, yeah. So, whatever. Fun times there in the middle of a horrible situation. And so basically, it actually goes pretty well for the Empire until Village completes his ritual. Now, he had to rush the ritual because he was sort of under duress, and he summons out a big host of Tzeentch demons. And so this is all like pink horrors and screamers and all this kind of stuff comes out, flamers and things. And so now all of a sudden there's a brand new force, right? And this is a fresh force that starts attacking the very worn down Empire men. Because though they came out the victor and managed to really hack up or drive away most of the Warriors of Chaos in Volgan, the reality is they paid dearly for that, and they are just mortals, and now they're getting tired. And unfortunately, into them comes a fresh wave of demons. That then, their mission sort of accomplished. Most of the Hell Cannons, if not all of them, destroyed, or pretty darn close to it, as close as they could ever hope to get. They decide, sound the retreat, and they start doing like a fighting retreat back to the Storm Bridge, because that portal has stayed open the whole time, which just blows my mind that nobody from Chaos before this point in the story was like, why don't I just walk in that thing? Like, you'd have to think a couple people would just go check it out. I mean, they're Chaos. What are they afraid of? But no one does that. So, not yet, at least.
Well, that's because those stalwart guards are sitting there defending it. It's all the great swords that they just park right there while they send out the cavalry to do all the damage, right?
Sure, but you think a couple of screamers would just sail over them and run in, right? Something like that. I mean, demons are sneaky. That's all I'm saying. But at any rate, yes, no one gets in the bridge, and they sound the retreat, and basically they have a sort of fighting retreat. Everybody of note gets away here. No one really relevant dies at this point. So I mean, like, lots of random people we just introduced 2 seconds ago get killed, and they fight in, and the Emperor basically like holds. He does the Thor, and he's like holding the. He really is Thor in the earlier part of this book, by the way. And he holds it off. And he then kind of comes in. Village, though, is just mad with rage at this situation and chases him into the portal. So he does what I just said. He runs in there. He's like, no, I'm coming with you. I'm going to get on in there and get you. He runs in the Storm Bridge, but there's two sort of ends to it, and the Emperor and the other troops get out the other side, because apparently it's really literally like a bridge. There is some amount of real space in this bridge with two ends. And the Emperor gets out the other side and shuts off the ability, and Village is now stuck in nowhere, I guess.
Yeah. Some sort of chaos magical realm.
Yes, we get a nice little cutscene there. If one of you two want to take that, this is a particularly funny cutscene.
Yeah, I think so. I'll tell you a little bit about Village. So, again, imagine Village if any of you have seen the model for this or seen the arc for this guy, it's a big chunky Chaos Warrior with his left shoulder, and there's like an apparition that's coming out of his shoulder. Now that apparition is Village. He's the brains behind the operation, and he is sort of morphed and melded in some weird zinky way to his brother, who is called Toman, and that's the Vessel. So there's been lots of parallels about this in past writing. Like if you can imagine the Master Blaster and the Mad Max, that's a pretty relevant thing right now. Or any other situation where it's the tiny little weakling brain behind the big beefy monster. Think of Thankwall and Bone Ripper, for example, on a smaller scale.
The new Storm Fiends.
Yeah, same kind of thing. Or the Storm Fiends, yeah, with the little brain brothers at the back.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, so Village is cursing his way through this realm, this sort of ever-changing magical stretch of superhighway or whatever it was, and he is cursing his brother and blaming him for the failures and fretting about the fact that he has failed the cause of Archaon, and he's zapping lightning around just for fun because to vent his anger. And then suddenly there's a little point where this comes on, where a voice just comes in and it says, and Village asks, "Where am I?" And the reply comes in, "You are in the domain of the great sorcerer. He has heard your prayer, loyal champion, and is pleased to fulfill it." And what prayer? Village demanded of the voices of echoes. "I made no such supplication." But then Toman says, "Oh, but I did. And it's my turn now." So all kinds of struggling and turncoating happens here, and it's sort of a morphing of where Village's body gets dissipated and sucked in, and Toman becomes whole again, and now he's in charge. The dumb brute is now the brains of the operation, and Village, as his own sort of pseudo-separate entity, is no more. So that's a little bit of chaos justice for the people out there. Village is done.
Yeah, it's important to note that Thoman hadn't spoken for years, right? And Village is just constantly making fun of him, just berating him and everything. And then all of a sudden, he speaks. Yeah, it's great. It's a really great little bit of justice from Tzeentch there. That's nice.
Yeah, I would say.
Yeah. No,
after that little... Yeah. So moving on, after that successful foray, Karl and Jerrod and all Korber and all his pals kind of regroup back in Averheim. And Karl reveals to them finally that there is another force on the way. This isn't the end of it. And we're going to have to brace ourselves, but we're not going to be able to do it on our own. So going through the list of who's not available in the war, he turns to the desperate choice. And that desperate choice is that he send some of his Pegasus Knights flying through the sky to Sylvania, of all things. Knowing that Vlad von Karstein is now the Elector Count of that area, and that Nagash has set up shop there, he believes that desperately there can be with them some sort of common alliance by having the same enemy. So off they go, flying into the skies, these Pegasus Knights, and they fight their way through the harpies that are clouding the skies, and they eventually do, after a couple of losses, make their way to Sylvania. Now, when they get there, it really doesn't go their way. They are delivered to the Black Pyramid so they can present their case to Nagash. But honestly, Nagash's interest is he's not keen on it, because first of all, his stance is, well, why do I want to help dead people when you're actually more useful to me? Or sorry, why do I want to help live people when you're actually more useful to me dead? So it kind of falls on deaf ears there in Nagash land, with the exception of a couple of individuals. And I'm kind of excited about this one in a little way, because we see Balthasar Gelt has still been trailing along with Vlad. And remember, we haven't seen him since the Nagash book either, where he went pseudo turncoat and joined in with the undead. and he started to learn how to raise skeletons and etc., and all that buffoonery before Vulcan and the Emperor, where he effectively just got exiled and turned into a pariah. So Gelt sees this, he catches wind of the message, and he understands the gravity of it, and he pleads to Vlad to get going. He says, Nagash doesn't want to do it, but let's go. Let's do that. And Vlad actually agrees for a couple reasons. One, because he actually does feel a little bit duty sworn to the Empire now that he's an Elector Count. And that's his sovereign nation, recognizing that if the Empire falls, then Sylvania is the next target anyway, so he may as well give it a hand. And he also touches on the fact that Nagash hasn't kept up his end of the bargain. And to recall, his end of the bargain was restore Isabella von Karstein to me, return her from the dead, and to Vlad, and that has not happened. So they march out. And off they go. What do you guys think of this turn of events? I know you're a Vlad fan, Vince.
I am, yeah. I love it. I think it's great. I think it absolutely, I think at this point in the story, well, first of all, I've said Vlad is the real protagonist. This story, demands the whole time. I would have loved to see this whole thing happen from his perspective, frankly. I think he's not the hero we need. He's the hero the Warhammer world deserves. And it's great to watch him sort of. I think in this moment, the thing that's motivating him is he realizes he has more in common with the Emperor and the men of the Empire than he does with Nagash and the other Mortarchs. Right? The other Mortarchs just sicken him. They're all these either just basically mindless servitors like Karl and Archaon. He sees them as basically just puppets of Nagash. Or completely self-obsessed and just, like Neferata, or the basest traitors who have no concern but their own power and are willing to just, and are just stupid like Manfred. None of them stand for anything, right? Vlad actually has some level of principle, some beliefs. He believes in something besides himself, and none of the other ones do, including Nagash. So I think that's what makes him feel sympathy to the Empire.
Yeah. So Vlad recognizes that he's got to be a little bit stealthy about this. So he just gathers a small contingent of knights, and he and Gelt head off. He kind of recognizes that Manfred's probably going to tattle on him because Manfred is the jealous wretch that he is. And he is beyond jealous that Vlad has been restored as sort of the head of Sylvania even before him. So he recognizes that's a risk, that he might lose favor with Nagash, but he still, again, feels that he's duty-bound. And Gelt, of course, is so hell-bent on some kind of redemption because of where he left it on the northern reaches of the Empire that he really wants to get back into that. So off they go, small group, and then it we leave them for a little bit, and then we come back to Averheim and Archaon marching down. Keith, you want to get back in on it here?
Yeah, sure, I'd love to. So Archaon turns up with a force of super Khorne warriors called the Scaramore. Now these guys aren't your normal just Chaos Marauders or Chaos Warriors. They find the men of the Empire just so far beneath them that even an Empire man's skull is not worth Khorne's gaze. So they actively hunt out other Chaos Warriors to kill. Only those skulls are worthy enough. So these guys are they're crazy. And they're led by their host of, blessed by Khorne. So we have Valkia, who's just come back from the campaign of Nagaron, killing all of the Dark Elves that were left there. We've got a new special character called Scar Bloodwrath, who's been, wandering the Chaos wastes for centuries, lopping off heads for the glory of Khorne. And he's been killed hundreds of times. And his kind of shtick is that, even if he dies, he gets reborn from the blood of his victims because he's so favored by Khorne. And of course, we've got Skyla Ungrim, another one of Khorne's champions who was so bestowed with the gifts of Khorne that he actually turned into a chaos spawn, which is pretty neat. But people still venerate him and as one of Khorne's chosen. And then, of course, we've got the Bloodthirster, which Archaon's on. So they get to the camp, and then the Skaven, being quick to notice when the apple cart's about to get upset, they run away. They want nothing to do with this band of frothing loonies, and they just hightail it out of there, which turns out to be the right move because they essentially move in and cull the rest of Village's forces, like basically saying, it's a cull. We're going to get rid of all you weak guys, and any of you, the rest of you that are still standing in the morning. You guys are alright by Khorne, and you get to get thrown at the walls, so that's okay. So the men of the Empire at this point, they're feeling pretty good about themselves because, most of the Hell Cannons are destroyed, there's no more bombardment, and they think, hey, this new army is just mostly infantry, and there's, a couple skullcrushers and blah, blah, blah. Our walls are big and strong, and we can withstand it. And Archaon essentially thinks that, oh, no, you've hidden behind your walls, you've already accepted your fate, it's just a matter of time. But Archaon's not the most patient of men. So there's this nice little cutaway scene where Archaon is standing out and he's looking over his vast, vast horde. And the Bloodthirster demands to know what Archaon wants to do. And Archaon just sits on his horse and doesn't say anything and just surveys his surroundings. And essentially he's just dominating the Bloodthirster. And going back to what we were talking about in the beginning, what Vince mentioned is that Archaon doesn't see himself as a pawn of the gods. And so we get this internal monologue of Archaon where he's just thinking, this Bloodthirster wants nothing more than to kill me, but he's not going to kill me because I'm in Khorne's good books right now. And Khorne is the easiest of the four brothers to keep entertained. I just have to keep killing people, and that's kind of what I want to do anyway, so that's fine. And so you kind of get, maybe Archaon he's playing the gods a little bit, and you kind of wonder if he's going to overreach at some point, and that'll, he'll stumble, and that'll be his downfall. But again, the Bloodthirster, demands to know what Archaon wants to do, and because this Bloodthirster, being a Bloodthirster, is just ready for slaughter. But Archaon has something a little more tactical, a little more strategic and sneaky in mind. But he's so close to crushing the Empire, and it even mentions how, even though he's anticipating this massive battle, and it's basically millennia of work all coming to a head in this final confrontation, he doesn't feel excitement or nervousness or anything like that. His soul is just this yawning abyss, and all of these feelings are just swallowed up. Now the defenders, like I said, they're expecting some time, but that's not going to happen. So Archaon rounds up the last few Hell Cannons and basically decides all of them are going to batter the northern gate. That's where we're going to get at that. And then he sends a bunch of giants and slaughter brutes to attack the gate as well. But of course it's really well defended, so the Hellblasters and the cannons come up and they're shooting them up and what have you. But as this is happening, the Scaramore, which are full of these Skull Reapers, they're just assaulting the walls. And they've got these massive metal grappling hooks which they're throwing up, and they're climbing over each other, throwing the dead bodies behind them, not worried about it, not losing the fervor for battle, even though, countless numbers of them are being slaughtered. And this slaughter goes on all day and all night. And then finally, as the first rays of dawn hit, the men of the Empire realize that they've done too good of a job. And that the mound of bodies is literally just a few feet from the crenellations of the wall. And so the Skull Reapers, they just keep on climbing, and they eventually crest that wall. I
want to slip in with one thing here, if that's okay.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
Just as a bit of a history thing, over a decade ago, we all know they did a Storm of Chaos campaign, which was sort of the Archaon coming down on the Empire campaign, and they had these characters that they had in the Chaos Army that you could add in, and they were called Flayerkin. And it sounds a little bit like these Wrathmongers in a junior way, but what they did is they had all these guys with claw limbs, and they had chains that extended from their limbs with hooks on them. And otherwise they were just mindless automatons that were to climb the wall, and they would penetrate the rock and bring their hooks in, and they would die there. But they would just create fleshy ladders for everything else to climb up upon. And that's kind of what I imagine going on here at the gates of Averheim as well. Sort of imagine it that way.
Yeah, it's pretty brutal. Like a lot of stuff is dying.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what does Archaon do now?
Well, Archaon charges the gate. So he heads straight for the north gate, and he's kind of, he's a little bit surprised that the north gate is still standing, and the wood facade is kind of chipped away, and inside is a hard steel core, and Archaon kind of, you get a sense that he's got this kind of grudging respect for the Empire that they were able to withstand that bombardment. They're not going to withstand the Lord of the End Times. So he charges the gate, he calls upon the power of Azul, who is the demon bound in the Slayer of Kings, and then just sweeps his sword forward, and the tip of the sword touches the gates. It just explodes outwards in a blinding flash of light. And as this is also happening, Scar Bloodwrath crests the top of the wall, and then just the slow trickle of Skull Reapers starts coming, and then it's a flood. And so at this point, the Empire have a lot to deal with. So,
yeah, I want to make one quick note, actually, if I can jump in real quick. So you got three main characters here, right? You've got the Emperor, Ungrim, and Duke Jerrod, really, as your three commanders of the three disparate forces. And it's the North Gate and the North Wall that takes this utter pounding, and where Archaon focuses his rage. And who, of course, is on the North Gate? Duke Jerrod. Like, with the Bretonnians get it, even in this final scene, they just get the worst of this invasion as they pay the price of the initial sort of Skull Reaper assault. And, yeah, it's unfortunate.
And talk a little bit about the peasants that the Jerrod still has following him around, right?
Yes.
And they're up near the walls, just getting slashed apart.
Yeah, the mob. That's the name of the unit in here, the mob. And it's literally just all the peasants who are like, well, if we stay here, we'll die, so we might as well just follow this guy around where maybe we'll live longer. It's the utter depression of it, yes. But I do, like, it's funny because Duke Jerrod is the only normal human in this story, as it were, right? The other two leaders are both superhumans, right? But he's like the Hawkeye, having to struggle to keep up here with like Thor and Iron Man, as it were, because you've got, both of them are incarnates. They've got winds of magic stuffed in them to make them quite literally superhumans, right? And Jerrod is he's just a Bretonnian lord. He's doing his best, and I do like his scenes in here. And I think as this goes on, you see a little bit more and more and more of him, doing his best to struggle to keep up with these supermen.
Well, then, why don't you take it from there and tell us how this unfolds now that chaos is inside?
Yes. So it all falls. It all falls apart very quickly. We actually start sort of the end begins with Jerrod and Karl Franz actually, like, as Jerrod is doing his sort of retreat from the wall, he hears like a noise, and it's Karl Franz landing next to him, and Karl Franz lands and says, hey, what's up, man? And, Jerrod basically says, well, we're all dying. And the Emperor says, yep, that seems to be the case. But look, there's this guy in charge of the enemy force named Archaon, and he's the Ever-Chosen. And if I have to die, it's going to be fighting and killing that man. If I bring him down, my last breath will be showing the Chaos Gods that, we will give a good fight and we'll fight to the very end. And Jerrod says, one last charge? And the Emperor says, one last charge. And so all the Bretonnian Knights and Reiksguard Knights and all the infantry they've got left, Archaon is in this central plaza right now. Like, he kind of blew through the door and walked right into this central plaza, which is like the Peltonplatz or Plenzerplatz, I think, or something like that. I don't know. Whatever. There's a couple different locations here. Yeah.
This is the Steelstrasse.
There you go. Yeah, he's in the Steelstrasse or whatever. I wish they gave a map of the city. I think that would really help me picture this better. But they don't do it. They do it sometimes in other things where they'll give you maps of the cities, but they didn't do that here.
Well, the two arenas to really be aware of is that Steelstrasse, which is the main gate that comes in down a long pathway towards the center of the city, And then there's the Plenzerplatz. Look at how good my German is, hey? My false German.
Pretty good.
The Plenzerplatz is towards the other wall where the dwarves have held up, and they've chosen that as a little bit of a defensible position because it's got sort of 3 walls that they can hold up in, rather than be exposed on multiple sides.
So yes, Archaon's down there. He's down this long road, right, down toward the center of the city. So they round up all the knights and all the infantry that are left, and Karl Franz and Duke Jerrod, they get at the head of this thing, and they go. They just start barreling. Like, they bring the full might of charging cavalry to bear on the forces of chaos. And they just start peeling chaos. I mean, like, this is a lot of land. Like, this is all the lances of Bretonnia left, basically, right? And plus all these Reichsguard knights. I mean, these are the best of the best. And they just charge right down the gut of this thing. And they don't stop, because they know if they stop and get in a fight, they're dead. So they just start blowing units aside and scattering people and charge into the middle of this, just driving and driving and driving for Archaon. And they're having pretty good success, and they talk about the infantry slower, and so what happens is they kind of scatter the forces, and as the warriors are sort of scattered and recovering from this chaos lance, or sorry, this cavalry lance, which is penetrating straight through the chaos, behind them then comes the great swords to kind of mop up and like engages them so that they can't get, hit from the rear as they try to drive deeper and deeper and deeper. And so from there we actually kind of like a couple things happen. I think it's right here where Jerrod fights Scar, right?
Well, if we just back it up a bit, there's a bit in the Plenzerplatz where the Bloodthirster flies in.
Ah, yes, thank you. I did forget about that. Yes.
Yeah, over on the dwarf side of thing, he shows up.
Yeah, well, so this bit in the story is a bit awkward because it's kind of chopping back and forth, and it's leading each point into like a kind of a cliffhanger, and then the next point. So, but yeah, you're right, Kieran. So the dwarves are essentially cut off, fighting more Scaramore at this point, and then the Bloodthirster is kind of flying into that Fencer Plaza place, where the Empire essentially enacting an orderly retreat back to the Averberg, which is kind of the central keep. But there's this giant monument of skulls from when Gorbad Ironclaw invaded and was repelled. And of course, Khorne loves nothing more than a big pile of skulls. So the Bloodthirster lands down, and then you've got some Pistoliers, and they're shooting holes in the guy, and he's just bleeding and bleeding. And then they kind of realize, oh god, he's bleeding more than he should be bleeding. And all of these skulls start filling up with blood, and the blood cools, and essentially just summons forth hordes and hordes of bloodletters, which turns kind of the orderly retreat to the central keep into a total rout. And then it kind of makes the point that, that keep, the Averberg, it still could have held, except the Bloodthirster got in there because it stayed open just a little bit too long to let the retreaters in there, and he caught the gate and just ripped it apart, and then went to town on those guys inside.
Yeah, that's a mean wrestling move.
Yeah. I thought it was kind of, so I don't know how you guys felt about this, but I was kind of a little bit, it almost seemed like the Bloodthirster was using magic, like summoning demons. I know Khorne demons have to get summoned in Subway, and that demons are innately magical and all that kind of stuff, but it was just a little bit like, I don't think you should be doing that.
It even says he starts like some kind of incantation. I think they use the word like incantation.
I think you're right. I don't know if I agree with that.
I never really thought about where they come from. You accept that it's magic and sorcery with the other 3, but
yeah,
they got to come from somewhere.
I mean, if all the cases, blood and skulls, then it'd be everywhere. But I don't know. That was maybe a little an early balderdash moment for me.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. Well, so again, as you say, we're cutting back and forth a little bit between these things, and we have little vignettes of battles happening here and there. Now, I want to remind us that our good pal Schwarzhelm is in the mix here with Karl Franz and his charging fellows as well. But I think it's the one, I guess in sequence order, it is Jerrod that kind of has it out with Scar Bloodwrath.
Yeah,
Well,
so
you
like
look at
I had to relook at this because this is like it goes. It's very staccato back and forth, right? So
Well, you know what? Who cares if we get it in sequence order?
Right.
Go ahead. Tell us about Jerrod.
Sure.
What's
You've got Ungrim, Schwarzhelm, and Jerrod, right? So you got these three big fights that happen back to back to back. I'll take Jerrod because I like this one.
Yeah, go.
So Jerrod is tired. He's hacking apart just tons and tons of people, and then out come more of the Skull Reapers and such, and namely led by Scar Bloodwrath, right? And they come from the Steel Strasses. I'm not good with German. They come from like the north side in this sort of three-pronged maneuver, and they come in, and I mean they are just he is just chopping down Bretonnian knights. You know, he swings out his weird flail axe hammers and is like grabbing knights off their horses by their lances and chopping their heads off and just being basically being a very annoying champion of Khorne. Jerrod says, "All right, well, got to do this." They talk about how his sword arm is so tired from swinging so far, he's not sure he can swing anymore, but he is of a steely purpose. And he turns around and charges at Scar, kind of catches him across the shield, but doesn't manage to achieve anything. And so Jerrod sort of hits him, rides by, comes back around, and what ends up happening is Jerrod manages to get one up on him. Of course, as he's celebrating his inevitable victory and sort of like doing the evil villain laugh of "I'm going to destroy you," Jerrod pulls one out on him and slices right through deep into his rib cage, and Scar is dead before he hit the ground from Jerrod's holy blessed sword. So that guy we just introduced dies.
Yeah, as you do.
Yes.
Yeah. His special power is to come back to life, though, so I don't think it's the last we see of him.
Indeed, that is true. But for now, he's out of this fight.
Yeah.
So we also had Ungrim and Skyla, and then as well there's also Schwarzhelm and Valkia are the other two big fights that happen at the same time.
Okay. Well, let me tell you about something else in between, because this is my boy. And so up in the skies, Balthasar Gelt has decided to leave Vlad behind in his haste to get out and save his fellow people. And as he's riding along in the sky on his trusty Quicksilver Pegasus, he's sensing a build-up of the lore of metal. And he's intrigued by this because he recognizes that he went from being the Supreme Patriarch and the master of the lore of metal all the way over to the dark side and becoming the Necromancer and raising dead. So he's consciously trying to make the effort to kick that habit and leave that behind. It's sort of like shaking cocaine, right? So it felt good at the time and it felt like the right thing, but now he's got to come clean. So this is sort of reinvigorating him and driving him on to greater haste. So he closes in on sites of Averheim and has to make his way through a bunch of harpies, and he taps into metal magic to zap him out of the sky and clear his path and sizzle some harpies on the way by. And he's feeling pretty good about it. He's feeling pretty good. And he actually, at this time as well, senses that it could all be his for the taking. But he holds off. He recognizes, swung too far the other way. I don't want to swing all the way back all at once because, I could become a junkie for metal magic. I don't know what he's worried about. But he recognizes that and he kind of holds back a little bit. So he accesses what he needs to get his end goal. And he just comes swooping down on the city, and he approaches from the end of the east wall, and that's where all the dwarves are holed up. And there's some of them that are still on the wall, and they got war machine encampments entrenched up there, etc., etc. And they're just about to fire off at him, thinking that it's some sort of chaos beastie coming out of the sky. And a dwarf engineer tells them to hold. And then they hold for a second. Gelt sweeps past, and then the engineer gives me the order to fire, and they just blast a whole bunch of harpies out of the sky, making Gelt able to land down right close to the dwarf encampment. And he has a little bit of chatty words with Ungrim right at this moment, because Ungrim's there with his fiery fireness, and he's channeling all the winds of Akshi, I think is the name of the wind. Maybe.
Shaman. Oh, is
No,
metal or
Shaman
shaman?
is the metal one.
Yeah,
Shaman.
Charon or whatever. Charon.
Oh, okay, wind of fire. There you go. So, and then we get this other little bit of challenge moment, because Ungrim is there, and Skila Affengrim has followed all the smells of the slaughter, and he's made his way up there, and he's got a host of other spawn with him, and all their gangly limbs are flailing away and causing trouble for the dwarfs. But the dwarfs have, admittedly, the best amount of counters for the spawn in all of their slayers that have come with Ungrim from the Slayer Keep. So they're all happy to wade in there, muscles bulging and tattoos flaring, and get into it with some monsters, feeling that's a pretty worthy death for them. So that turns into a bloody fight back and forth, mostly going the way of dwarfs. And it is, in fact, Ungrim that seals the deal on Skyla Affengrim. And I don't know if there's any great moves by Skyla here to really oppose the greatness of Ungrim at this moment.
Oh, I quite like this fight.
Yeah, what did you remember about this fight that was?
There's a little particular where so Ungrim dives behind a giant and hamstrings him, and then runs over and buries his axe in the skull, and then Skyla charges up, and Ungrim can't get his axe out. So Skyla picks him up and starts whipping him around, using him as a flail almost. Okay. And then on one of these passes, Ungrim picks up his axe, and in my head, he's just shouting, "Nobody tosses a dwarf!" And then smashes Skyla in the face.
He also proves that dwarves do in fact bounce. So the long-standing question is answered, because it specifically says the Slayer King bounced twice, which I think is probably the most ignoble thing you can do as a king, is to bounce twice. As though he's a gummy bear.
Yeah. So he smashes the axe into Skyla and then guts him and then tosses him over the wall. And that's the end of that.
Yeah, good action. And right at this moment, I think there was another group of dwarfs that were further south in the city that have made their way through and sort of consolidated with the Slayers up there in Dwarf Keep, or where they've settled as Dwarf Keep, right?
It's okay. The dwarfs is not far.
Yeah, we'll come back to the dwarfs in a second, but let's Keith, you want to tell us about Schwarzhelm and his?
Sure. So Schwarzhelm was following up, as Vince was saying, he's following up the Emperor's last charge with I think they're called the Griffin Guard. It's basically the Emperor's own personal bodyguard of Greatsword. So he's running along, he's got his Imperial Standard, and he's beset by Valkia, the Bloody. So she, if you don't know, she's been blessed by Khorne. She's got these wings and horns and hooves and this massive spear. So she dives in once with the spear, and Schwarzhelm just manages to deflect using the handle of the Imperial Standard, and it kind of hits the bottom of it and splits it off and splinters it. And then she comes back for a second pass, and Schwarzhelm was just barely able to parry, and then he tries to turn it into a riposte, but her hooves kind of kick out and he loses his sword in the fray. And then they kind of lock eyes, and Schwarzhelm knows that this is the last pass, and she's not going to miss this time. So she lunges in with her spear, and at the last moment he flips around the Imperial Standard and uses the pointy end, as his own kind of makeshift spear. And as she impales him, he uses her momentum to force her down to the Imperial Standard and kill her too. So they meet in the middle and embrace and die, both of them. But also, Khorne has this really annoying habit of bringing Valkia back to life every time she dies as well. So who knows if this is the end.
What I like is how quickly they did, they do a really nice job here. This is a very sort of big moment, right? You have the Herald of the Emperor killing Valkia the Bloody and dying in the process. And what happens to them so they're both stood there, right? Both speared in this heroic death perfect moment. And what happens not 2 seconds later? A random juggernaut Skull Crusher of Khorne rides through as part of a charge and doesn't care, rides over the top of them, crushes both of their bodies down into the mud, and just, unrecognizable, just pop, 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 whatever, we got things to do. No care or concern for the greatest, just like whatever, it doesn't matter, it's just another body, it's just another skull for the Throne of Khorne. It is, in the end, the counting is the only thing that matters.
Well, what were you hoping for here? That they would have like a boy girl moment where they, as their lifeblood ebbs from their bodies, that they lock eyes as they're both.
They realized they were destined for each other the whole time. No, I just mean like even their dead bodies in the heroic moment has no reverence, right? Just some random skull crusher literally tramples them into the mud because he happened to be going that direction. There was no purpose to it. He wasn't attacking. They were just in his way.
Such is the ebbs and flows of war.
Yes.
Well, yeah, it's a good moment though. I think
It is.
I think Schwarzhelm acquits himself pretty well. So out of this, we got 2 for the good guys and 1 draw out of our epic challenges. But of course, we have the biggest challenge of all to come. And Franz makes his way to Archaon. Vince, this is the big one. You want to talk us through the actions here?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's actually like kind of 2 things going on here, right? So because 2 things are happening simultaneously. So on one hand, the Emperor is now before Archaon, and Archaon kind of sits there for a moment, and you can picture him just kind of giving one of these, just like a little finger wave, and out go the Swords of Chaos, right? Like some number of them, and I mean there's a lot of them, but some number of knights charge the Emperor. And the Archaon has said very clearly that the Emperor is for him and him alone. Yet he sends out the Swords of Chaos. And my feeling is he literally was just doing it to watch the Emperor fight. Like he knew he was just sending these men to death, which of course is what happens. The Emperor just dispatches them with little effort or show. And Archaon kind of gives him like the head nod of like, all right, I see the measure of you. Let's do this. And so at the same time, across the way, we've got Gelt. And I don't know if you want to take this little portion because I know Gelt is your boy, but basically Gelt and the dwarves are talking, and Gelt sort of sees like what's going on across the city to a point, and is like, we need to get over there and help. And the dwarves are like, we'll never make it. It's a sea of these ridiculous chaos people between us and them. If we march, we're just going to die before we ever get there. Yeah. And that's when Gelt sort of hatches a plan. If maybe you want to take that little part, then we can pick back up with the Emperor.
Yeah, sure. Well, so there's a bit of a lull in the battle after the spawns are dispatched, and the new set of dwarfs, the Zufbari dwarfs, come and join them. So they momentarily get the upper hand, but they recognize it's only momentary. More masses are coming to get them. So they quickly have this little chat about how desperately Gelt, again, still wants to redeem himself to the Emperor, ultimately, not just to his people, but more specifically the Emperor. So he's really jonesing to get himself over there and show his worth. Now, he has to do a little bit of convincing here to Ungrim and the dwarfs, but again, these are slayers, so they're pretty easy to sway when it comes to, look, there's better stuff to kill over there, there's more heroic things over there. So that's kind of the angle that Gelt takes. And at the same time, he is finally accepting that wind of Shaman that he recognized when he was up in the skies. He's going to have to take it all in. So he does that. He drinks it all in, and he becomes effectively, at this point, for all intents and purposes, the incarnate of metal. And this wind has been thrown around. And he pulls out of his bag of tricks something from the way back days when he was the Supreme Patriarch, and there was a spell that was beyond even his reach as the Supreme Patriarch. He calls it the Crucible. And effectively what he does is he gets all the dwarfs to gather around, and he momentarily turns them all to gold, channels them through the metals, and regrows them out of metal somewhere else. So this is another way of teleporting. It's not the Storm Bridge. It's not the Slan teleport. It's not the It's not the Vermin Lord working its way through the shadows, but it's his own version of the same kind of idea. So he teleports all the dwarves, pulls them out of the Cleanser Platz, and whoop, brings them up into the Steel Strass where the thick of the other action is happening. And it doesn't take more than a second for Ungrim to wade in there. But there is a little bit of happening between Archaon and Karl Franz just before that happens, though. So I'm going to switch it back to you to bring us up to speed there.
Absolutely. Yeah, the end times could also be called the birth of a parent. Everybody's got teleportation. But so it just happens all over the place in the story. So yes, we finally now have the showdown. So as Gelt is hatching this plan and considering absorbing the wind of magic, Archaon and the Emperor clash. And they have a series of exchanging blows, and they're sort of basically showing each other as equals, right? And the magic that Karl Franz calls down is turned aside by Archaon's protective, runes and chaos powers, and at the same time the amulet of Sigmar upon Franz's chest turns aside the baleful incantations of Archaon. So they turn to weapons. I feel like this is kind of like the beginning, or like the fight in one of the prequels, to mention them, where they're going at each other with like force lightning or force powers, and they're like, oh, we can't settle this with force powers alone. They're like, you're right, we better go to the lightsaber. So they go to the weapons, and they start banging on each other with their magic weapons. And the Emperor is the first one to sort of really get a legitimate blow through. He actually does get around the big brass shield and lands a fairly solid blow. Unfortunately, in doing so, he had to overextend himself, and Archaon sees that and strikes. And he is so fast that even the Emperor is not going to be able to get out of the way. And Deathclaw, always the savior of the Emperor, his best buddy, and I don't mean that in a bad way, it's great, you gotta love Deathclaw, sees that his master is about to be his head hewed from his shoulders, and rears backwards and takes the sword into his own neck. And Deathclaw kind of slumps over. And, he's not dead, but he's not great. And he would, basically they put it as he would need immediate medical attention to live, right? And that leaves the Emperor kind of on foot and bowed against the Everchosen, still on his horse, on Dorgar, the demon horse. He runs by, charges, kind of smashes the Emperor, and then turns around. But instead of riding over him kind of a second time, he kind of turns around and monologues, because he's a villain and he's waited so long for this, right? I mean, he has waited so long to taste this moment, and he's actually sad because this is pathetic, right? Karl Franz, and this fight took a couple minutes. Archaon has been, as you said, building for centuries toward this moment. And he basically says, for years I've heard tell of Karl Franz, the greatest emperor since Sigmar himself. You're barely worth killing. And basically Archaon says, the power that's on your shoulders isn't yours. I'll strip it from you and return it to the true master, the changer of ways. And the Slayer of Kings sweeps out. Karl Franz blocks it with his hammer, and the hammer shatters like broken glass. And a lightning bolt strikes out of the heavens, hits Karl Franz. He tries to stay standing, but is pushed to a knee, and then like water going back up into a faucet just sucks the sort of super god powers seemingly out of Karl Franz. Franz, never being one to stay down, though, even before the lightning is gone, is up on his feet and actually trying to swing and punch Archaon in the face, which Archaon just laughs at and easily bats the blow, and the Emperor aside, bloodying his face. And Archaon's just literally like pacing around him now. And in this ring that the swords have made, Archaon's knights have sort of made this, this battle ring for them that they're not letting anybody else in. And Archaon says, look, you're pathetic. You have no empire, you have nothing. No allies, no god favors you. You are nothing. And that's when the Emperor sort of says this very... I wish this line was a little better. It does feel a bit cheesy. And he says, yes, well, I've got one thing you'll never have. And Archaon says, what could you have that I possibly lack? And the Emperor says, hope. Oh boy, that's a bit tropey. But, whatever. There we go. That's what he says.
Weak, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
However, the timing is perfect though, because that's when all the crucible happens that we just talked about before, and that manifests itself. So, Keith, let's pass to you to get in on the action for a little bit.
Sure. So all the Gelt and all the golden dwarves, they start coalescing. But sadly, the spell is imperfect, and a couple of dwarves just remain gold. Which, like, if you're a dwarf, that's probably a pretty good way to go. Like, if you're not a slayer, getting toward the gold must be pretty sweet for them. So anyway, so Gelt turns up, and then he's momentarily disorientated, but he's alright. And then the dwarves just go to town, attacking the Swords of Chaos and everything. Then Ungrim just hurls himself at Archaon. Then Gelt enacts this new spell where he takes all the armor and the weapons from all the dead all around Averheim and melts it down, and then spreads it across this giant wall in between all the good guys and the bad guys, essentially. And it shoots up and basically protects them. And it says, like, he gets an instant headache, and he can feel a throb of pain every time one of the chaos hammers on said wall, but it's holding. But it's pretty weak to form around Archaon and Ungrim, and they're going to town on each other. Archaon's armor is all dented up, and Ungrim's protective cloak is completely shredded, and but eventually the wall shoots up and blocks them off in between each other, and Archaon kind of gives a roar of frustration, and so does Ungrim. And Ungrim's like, what did you do that for? I totally had him. And the Emperor was kind of like, no, you definitely didn't just have him. So there's a complete lull in the battle as the Chaos are trying to get past this giant wall of metal. And then he looks at Gelt, and Gelt is kind of like all sheepish, kind of going, I did good, boss. You can forgive me for all my necromancy. And, the Emperor is a pretty gracious guy, and he's like, yeah, it's a pretty good start. We'll see what you can do. So they kind of wander back, and the Emperor comes across the body of Schwarzhelm and laments a little bit. Eventually Gelt is like, so the Bloodthirster at this point is done with the Averberg, and he's flying back at them, and the Emperor's kind of like, Gelt, can you get us out of here? And Gelt is like, I can't take everyone, and I can't go very far. So Ungrim turns to him and says, you leave me and mine here, and we'll hold them off while you guys make good your escape. And so Crucible number 2 goes down, and they melt away and fly away in their molten gold form. And then it kind of, and then Ungrim is kind of left with his dwarves, and it's like, we'll give them a battle to remember. Almost, again, a repetition of the last charge of Jerrod and his knights. And, we don't really know what happened to those guys yet. I'm just reading through this chapter by chapter, so I don't know what's happened to them. I'm assuming they haven't gotten out of this alive, but we'll see what happens. So Ungrim and the dwarves stick around. They start bashing out some chaos, and then it cuts to Vlad von Karsten, who is not too far away. He's kind of on a hill overlooking Averheim. And Vince, I'll let you take this closing bit because I know you're a Vlad fan.
Yeah, that's all you, Vince.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm happy to. That's a terrible picture of Vlad in the book here, by the way. He looks so hideous.
Maybe before you do, though, before you do take that on, I just want to say, I feel my boy Gelt gets the redemption that he was after here. I feel that he's regained some stature in the Empire, and he's shown that he's not a terrible guy, and that hard times. He had to turn to hard things. I'm sure that in their time together, if they have any more time together, he can explain himself to the Emperor and let him know why he did all the actions that he did. But at the moment, feeling good about Balthazar.
I'll say one thing about Gelt, and I think it's nice. He's got an interesting story arc where he starts off on the side of good, and then he kind of turns to the dark side, you might say, and then he comes back and kind of brings balance to the force a little bit. I'm seeing some parallels.
Very
So where are you
nice.
going with that?
Yeah,
that's the thought.
I agree. He does have a nice moment here. At the same time, if I don't think the Emperor could react any other way. There's probably like 100 living people left in the world. So when one more who's powerful shows up and says he wants to help, no, it's not really a time for grudges. That's more of a luxury item. So yes, we come to Vlad, who's outside the city with his Blood Knights. And when I say outside the city, I mean like they ride up to get within vision of the city. And very quickly he realizes that that we're too late. He just sees this smoking husk, fire everywhere, and he's a pretty powerful vampire. I would imagine, like a shark can smell a drop of blood in thousands of gallons of water. He just can smell the blood from miles and miles away, and the air is just thick with it. And and he sort of sees this this going on, and he judges that Gelt has reached there, and some part of him is tempted to make a last. I think it's interesting that he's even tempted. Some part of him is tempted to go in and make some last stand to reclaim something of his lost honor, but he decides against it. And the reason he decides against it is not for selfish reasons. I really love this. He's deciding between this sort of heroic ideal of making a last stand, but he decides not to. Why? Because Sylvania needs him. His land that he is the Elector Count of needs him, not because of that. That is his stated reason, right? And if Sylvania is to endure, then he must live. And I love the concept. He believes in his land. Again, he has some higher purpose, and he believes in something beyond himself, not just the salvation of his life. Although I'm sure he likes that too. I'm not trying to hold him up as some paragon of idealism. I'm just saying he actually has some kind of moral. And so as he sort of turns around, he's like, all right, well, that sucks. We came for nothing. He issues them eastward, and then this big roar of fire shoots up out of the city, and in this column of flame, he sees a sort of bearded face kind of crying out for a moment, bellowing out a challenge. And Vlad says there was a presence, a valiant soul striking one last blow before it passed into oblivion. And so from that, basically, we're led to understand that, of course, as we expected, Ungrim and the rest of his remaining slayers were given the death they had sought after for so long, and the wind of fire, I think that's Akwishi, whatever, is now set free again, searching around for a new host, which may or may not come into play very soon. But yes, and Ungrim falls, and Vlad turns and leaves the city, and it's dead behind.
Yeah, even more apoplectic than that. It's sort of, I read on here, and it says that the buildings in their path of the flames collapsed like trees before a hurricane. The choking mass welled up over the city walls and spilled across the Aver Valley, leaving the suffocated dead in its wake. So this was like napalm in the morning kind of explosion here that Ungrim went into. And it seems to impress upon you that it just burned that entire city down and everything that was inside it and all around it as well.
Yeah, I've got to imagine a lot of the Core Knight warriors probably did not get out of the death of Ungrim. He took a lot with him when he went. I'd like to think so.
Oh yeah.
Nah, Dragon Bane gems for that 2-up Lord Saber, a dime a dozen. 520.
They just passed those out.
Yeah, just pass the Lord Save, fine.
Yeah. So also in this, we assume that Gelt and the Emperor and whatever tiny bit of entourage remains to them managed to get away in the mini crucible that got them to escape. In fact, even Vlad says that he sees a flash of a pillar of gold go up into the sky before the firebomb goes off. So we assume that they get away. and that brings the curtain closing down on chapter 1.
Mm-hmm.
But let's take a moment here before we close out about chapter 1, and guys, I'll let you tell me about your moments of brilliance and balderdash in the opening salvos of Archaon. Keith, what do you like?
Well, I mean, where do you go from there? I mean, everything's going down in chapter 1, right? It's kind of hard to see what the Emperor and Gelt were going to do. I mean, Gelt says he couldn't take them very far, as the city is essentially overrun with Chaos Warriors, and you know, the Empire, as far as I can tell, anyway, is broken. Except for the Moots. Except for the Moots. Moots is okay. But the Empire is broken, right? I mean, the Emperor himself is still alive, but as Archaon even said, the lightning has fled. So I think that's a really great cliffhanger. What does that mean? Is Karl Franz still an incarnate of heavens, or no? Is he still Sigmar's avatar on Earth, or not? Like, what's happened there? So I think what I really liked about chapter 1 was a lot of stuff, really big stuff happened. Like, the Warhammer world is irreversibly changed just from the very first chapter, and it leaves a lot of questions hanging. Hopefully those questions will be answered.
Yep. Yeah, I get the impression that action of the lightning striking down and then sucking back up is Karl Franz losing his heaven power. So that's how that's going. So that's another wind out there swirling around with no home either.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, as you guys know, my moment of greatness here is the return of Gelt. It's my guy. So I'm pleased to see him getting some redemption.
I would like to call Gelt out on another balderdash moment, if I may.
Sure.
When he's up flying around and he's shooting harpies and furies with his metal magic, those guys don't wear armor. Searing bolts of doom don't work on those guys.
But he's turning them to bolts to drop out of the sky.
Yeah, he's just final transing them all day long.
Yeah, that's what he's doing. So Vince, how about you? What are your happy thoughts about chapter 1?
All the moments of brilliance I really, really like are I think bad guy moments. I love when Archaon kills Kairos Fateweaver at the start of the chapter, because I've been waiting for that dumb bird to die since he first reared his ugly heads at the start of the story. I find him just unbelievably annoying with his oh, well, we know everything, but we're gonna talk in weird riddles. Like, no, shut up, die bird. And we got a much more straightforward chosen sort of chaos out the other side in the form of Kabanda, who he's not interesting or anything, but hey, at least he's straightforward. He likes to kill. Fair enough. And I love the ultimate fate of Village the Curseling. I love that little moment with Thamen or whatever when Tzeentch gives him his reward. The Changer Ways is not a being to be trusted, and that if even as his most favored, you should absolutely never forget that. He is the trickster god for a reason. That guy makes Loki look like just like a magic shop party favor illusionist. And so I like that. Balderdash is suddenly everyone teleports everywhere. Like all the time. Just tons of it. I mean, it's just everywhere. But when I honestly had to read that Stormbridge thing the first time I read this 3 times, because I was like, wait, what? What? I thought maybe he was gonna drop on them or do some. I did not see that coming, and I was like, that is really stretching. And then the metal to crucible, I turn you to gold and then teleport you because you're gold. I'm not sure about that one either. I get the shadow one, I think. I understand Skitterleaf, but I understand the shadow teleport and stuff like that Teclis does. I'm not sure about these last two. Apparently, every wind of magic can just teleport.
I would explain it like world roots, right? So if you can go down into the ground in one tree and come up out of the ground out of another tree somewhere else in the world, well, there's metal that's in rock, right? So you can kind of traverse through the little veins of metal that go through the rock underneath the earth, come out.
Yeah, why do I have to turn you to metal to do that?
Oh no, I thought it explained how he did it. I thought he turned into metal, and then it melts down, and then just the molten metal runs through the cobblestones really, really quickly, and then just turns it back into statues and flesh again. Well,
Maybe maybe that's so. So he's like
well,
flowing.
there you go.
Like
There's
flowing
two
teleportation.
explanations of how it could work.
Either way, that's my boulder dash. But you know, the fights are fine. It is a good chapter. I agree with what Keith said. It's a lot of big moments. But everybody in the world, like, it's obvious for the narrative that they need people to be in certain places, and so now everybody teleports. I personally can't wait for the beast wind teleportation. I assume you have to like turn into a monkey, and then you can magically teleport somewhere else. But you might stay a monkey. That's
They
what I
already
would
did
say.
that. In Thankwall, the guy turned into a flock of crows and flew off.
Yeah, that's Malagor's deal.
That's kind of a little closer, but yeah, I mean, I don't know if he's like teleporting. He's just kind of shape shifting and flying around.
All right. Well, that's all good stuff. We'll find out who else teleports probably in the next few chapters. Figure that all out. Everybody's got a Vermin Lord in the last book. Everybody's going to teleport in this one. I feel it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, guys. Well, let's sign off there at the end of Chapter 1 for Archaon, and we'll be back for more, of course, the rest of the end times. Good night, everyone.
Bye-bye.